Good morning. This is the Colorado Geologic Storage Stewardship Enterprise Board. That's a mouthful. It is the 18th of November, and it's 9 a.m., and we start with a roll call.
Thank you. Board Member Littlefield,
Present.
Board Member Murphy,
Present, and I'm having computer difficulties, so I'll be switching over soon, but I'm here. Thanks.
Board Member Randall,
I'm here. Thank you.
Board Member Robbins,
Here.
and Board Member Ross.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a full board present today.
Great, and it's great to see everybody. Welcome. We had a introductory meeting that involved some legal advice a week or two ago. This is our first formal meeting of the board. In that regard, I'd like to go around and make introductions from the board members as well as the folks that are going to be presenting to us. My name is Jeff Robbins. I'm the chair of the board. I also serve as the chair of the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. I've been in that role for 5, 6, 7 years now. And I'm really excited to be a participant in this board and the good work that we're going to be doing. With that, I would recognize Board Member Littlefield for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Littlefield. I work at the Colorado School of Mines as the Low Carbon Energy Program Manager, which just means I do everything geothermal and CCUS. And I'm also a PhD candidate in geochemistry.
Great. Welcome. Board Member Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everybody who's listening in. As part of my responsibilities as a director of the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, I also have the opportunity to serve on this board, which is tremendous. My day job involves managing the staff to the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. Thank you, Chair.
Tough job. Appreciate your work there. Board Member Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Bob Randall. I'm a partner at the law firm Kaplan Kirsch here in Denver. I'm in our environment and energy practice. Spent about a decade in the public sector and a decade in the nonprofit sector before entering private practice.
Great. Great to have you on board. Board Member Ross.
It's great to see you all. I am Ashley Ross. I've been in decarbonization and CCS for over 23 years, was most recently at the Department of Energy headquarters as Deputy Director of Carbon Management Technologies. And I'm currently Chief Commercial Officer of Moat. It's great to see you all.
Great. Thank you very much, board members, for the introductions. I think now we will hear some remarks from a key player with us. His name is Benjamin Boudreau. He is an Assistant Attorney General with the AG's office. He serves as our legal counsel. And Mr. Boudreau, talk to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. Nice to see you all. My name is Benjamin Boudreau. I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the Colorado Attorney General's office. And I am, I lost my opening remarks. And I'm counsel to the Geologic Storage Stewardship Enterprise Board. The Stewardship Enterprise Board is born out of House Bill 25-1165, and the board's statutory authority can primarily be found at Section 3460-144 of the Colorado Revised Statutes. The board's primary responsibility is to set the stewardship fee to be paid by geologic storage operators in the state of Colorado, and the amount of the stewardship fee must be reasonably related to the overall cost of the long-term stewardship services that the enterprise will provide to geologic storage operators. Today, the board is meeting to hear presentations, receive information, and take recommendations from ECMC staff. Staff is scheduled to provide information which the board may find useful in determining the fee amount. The board is not scheduled to make a determination on the fee amount today. Rather, the board is currently scheduled to reconvene at the end of January to possibly make that determination. At the end of today's meeting, if you like, I can make recommendations on next steps and motions for doing that. But for now, I'll turn it back over to the chair, and we can move on with the agenda.
Great. Really appreciate the sage counsel, and I think we will turn to you toward the end for next steps. We've got 4 different presentations to the Geologic Storage Stewardship Enterprise Board. The first is a presentation from Quinn Antis, Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives and Finance with the Colorado Energy Office, concerning the state perspective on carbon management. Ms. Antis, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you to the board. Really appreciate seeing you all this morning and being able to share this presentation. I believe it's loading, but as a quick little background, I was brought onto the Colorado Energy Office to initially determine the Energy Office's strategy and policy design towards carbon management. And so can speak a little bit about that today, if these slides are working. So the Colorado Energy Office has been tasked primarily with determining how the state can reach net zero by 2050. And so we've put together multiple greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmaps. And so as you can see in this chart, the stars are our greenhouse gas targets. And even with all of the actions that the state has undertaken thus far, inclusive of that green line, we're still projecting about a 50 million metric ton gap by 2050, which is quite significant. And I definitely want to underscore that the state is primarily working to reduce emissions by transitioning to renewable energy, electrifying transportation, buildings, and industry. But even with all of those actions in place and all that we have committed to as a state, there still will be a meaningful delta. And so carbon management will play a key role in helping us meet our net zero target, particularly with CCS for hard to decarbonize industrial processes, including cement, steel, things that we just don't know how to decarbonize otherwise. Also inclusive of carbon dioxide removal, such as direct air capture, which does utilize geologic storage as well. So a bit of background on how the state has approached carbon management to date. In 2021, the state convened the CCUS task force with the goal of identifying how CCUS could support Colorado's larger climate target of achieving net zero by 2050. The result was a series of recommendations that focused on enabling and appropriately regulating this industry while addressing equity and community concerns. One recommendation in particular was to create legal and regulatory frameworks for the long-term stewardship and oversight of geologic storage sites. The state also put in place first-in-the-nation industrial decarbonization rules, which require heavy emitters over 25,000 tons of CO2 per year to achieve a 20% reduction in emissions by 2030. And carbon management, including CCUS, is an eligible compliance pathway. The state also has provided funding for this carbon management. Our office administers the Clean Air Program grants, which were $25 million over 5 years for industrial decarbonization projects. That funding has just closed its final round, and I'm pleased to report that we've received a number of carbon management applications. And we have the Colorado Industrial Tax Credit offering, a total of $168 million in competitive refundable tax credits over 9 years, and we still have the lion's share of this to distribute. We also signed an MOU with the state of Wyoming focused specifically on carbon removal. Our initial areas of focus were on measurement, reporting, and verification, as well as interstate pore space considerations. And there is likely to be a second MOU that will be released with some key findings from this partnership. And earlier this year, the Colorado Energy Office released the Carbon Management Roadmap, which was commissioned by the legislature in 2023. To identify key policies and actions to guide the state's carbon management efforts. The main intention of this roadmap was to identify the carbon management, climate, and economic opportunities available in our state that best draw on Colorado's natural resources, industry, talent, labor force, and economic development capabilities. The final 250-page roadmap makes 68 recommendations spanning 15 state agencies, and covers a pretty broad swath of topics, some of which are relevant to this conversation, including carbon capture, CO2 transportation, and geologic CO2 storage. One priority recommendation highlighted in this roadmap was to establish the framework for Colorado to conduct long-term stewardship following the closure of Class 6 wells. Also important to note is the finding that 49 of the 55 industrial facilities in Colorado that are eligible for the 45Q tax credits are located within geologic basins that have the potential to permanently store CO2. And the remaining 45Q eligible industrial facilities are within just 35 miles of a geologic basin with storage potential. In addition, 31 of these eligible facilities are located within 10 miles of at least 2 other industrial facilities, which indicates to us that there's strong potential for shared infrastructure, including CO2 transportation and Class 6 wells. And also, according to NETL, there's really strong storage potential within the state, 134 billion metric tons being the current medium estimate. And lastly, just to highlight that Colorado is already booming in terms of its carbon management potential, I would love to highlight and stress here that not all of these projects include geologic carbon storage. This is a pretty broad range of CCS and CDR projects, but Colorado's carbon management industry really is taking off and has a critical opportunity to lead, and the Energy Office is excited to support that.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the presentation. There was a lot of information that you covered really quickly. Do board members have questions? All right. I assume that we'll find these all the slides from today up on our website at some point. Is that right, Ms. Amaro?
Yes, that is
Okay,
correct.
great.
Yep.
All right. Let's now turn to the general legislative and regulatory overview of carbon management, and this is going to be presented by Mike Rigby, the ECMC Energy Transition Senior Scientist. Mr. Rigby, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, board members. Happy to be here today. I'm going to talk a bit about ECMC's path to Class 6 primacy, including some of the studies we've done and the laws that have been passed. So as Quinn mentioned, in 2021, the Pollution Reduction Roadmap was released, identifying CCS as a potential tool, which kind of led to the forming of that 2021 task force. Those recommendations were put out in early 22. At the same time, we were conducting a study on what it would take to get primacy as the COGCC at the time. Through 22, we building upon the recommendations from the task force, ECMC was directed to put together a legislative proposal. That was released in early 23, and a little later in the spring of 23, SB 23016 was passed, and granting ECMC authority to pursue primacy. That same year, the law was passed that directed the Energy Office to make the carbon management roadmap. Going into 24, as ECMC was going to be pursuing primacy, we put together a third study looking at the safety of the operations from source and capture all the way to storage and considerations for communities. And that was released in early 24. That same year, HB 241346 was passed, and it addressed some additional legal items related to Class 6. Coming into 2025, the Carbon Management Roadmap was released in February, and HB 251165 was passed this spring, establishing this board. We have been doing ongoing work with the EPA to progress to primacy, and we've been focusing on regulatory program. And between Mark, Bridget, and I, we will be kind of talking through a lot of these items. So going back to 2021, we are directed to look into what it would take for the state to pursue primacy. And we released this study in November of 2021. It reviews seeking and obtaining regulatory authority from the EPA. It reviews all the Class 6 project components, such as site characterization, monitoring, and modeling. So basically what it takes to get a Class 6 permit. And then evaluated our state resources, and in particular, ECMC's resources and expertise, as well as funding strategies for a safe and effective program. And there was a brief legal review. And then building upon that, in that 2021 task force, the ECMC put together the CCS legislative proposal, and that was released in early 23. This addressed more legal items, such as pore space ownership is for Class 6 projects is the surface owner. It created a process of unitization to bring together these property owners for a large project. It identified long-term site stewardship as a consideration, outlined some additional programmatic funding items, reviewed environmental justice considerations, CO2 pipelines, and had an appendix on emerging energy considerations. And as we went to build our Class 6 primacy or program and obtain primacy, we wanted to look more detailed into all the different impacts all along the way of these operations. So we put together the safety study. It's a pretty thorough technical study, starting with looking at capture technologies, modeling air impacts of a particular type of capture technology. Then looking at pipeline safety regulations and considerations. We did some pipeline dispersion modeling. And then moving towards the well, so we went from capture to transport to the well, looking at regulatory requirements and wellbore integrity requirements to keep the CO2 within the wellbore. And then all the way to the reservoir. So ensuring integrity in your reservoir and considerations like trapping mechanisms that keep the CO2 in place in the reservoir. And then looking at all of those impacts along the way, outlining considerations for safety of communities. So those were the 3 studies we've put together since 2021 that kind of led along this route. And I'm going to just briefly go over the laws as well. So in 23, SB 23016 was passed that gave us authority to seek primacy, but it also put some guardrails on how primacy and these projects should be done in the state, including requiring a cumulative impacts analysis. It gave local governments the option to regulate surface siting. It requires impacts be avoided, minimized, and mitigated for Class 6 wells. And it implemented a 2,000-foot setback from residence, schools, and commercial buildings. Then building on that effort, HB 241346 established pore space, unitization, and clarified geologic storage operations and updated a cumulative impacts definition to really build upon and solidify the legal framework for pursuing and regulating Class 6 in the state. And then the final legal piece came this spring, which created this board consisting of 5 members and directed the board to set the amount of the stewardship fee. And then just a little more to build on Quinn's comments. There is within these bills built in some intent on why are we doing it and how we should regulate it. So why we're doing it, as Quinn indicated, it's really a tool to reach our extensive climate targets, and it's a verifiable tool that can be used for select industries. And that was really solidified in the most recent law, HB 251165, that meeting these goals will involve multiple simultaneously pursued strategies, and that CCS is a tool, an essential tool for hard to decarbonize sectors, and that storing CO2 in the subsurface is really necessary to reach net zero globally and maybe equally important in the state. And then how are we approaching Class 6 regulation? This was outlined as a declaration in HB 241346 that it's the public interest for the Commission to implement a program that contributes towards our state greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, benefits the state and global environment, provides opportunities for just transition to help retain workers, protects disproportionately impacted communities, and for the safe and responsible use of our natural resources. So that kind of outlines the path we've taken all the way from doing these studies, establishing the laws, and up to kind of our Class 6 primacy and program development that Mark will be talking more on. So thank you, Board, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll take it over from here.
Go ahead, Mr. Seeley.
Thank you. My name is Mark Seeley. I'm the Geothermal and CCS Supervisor here at ECMC, and I'm here to talk to you about kind of our current status of our Class 6 primacy, as well as our program development. You know, Mike and Quinn showed a lot of our history that led us where we're at today. I'm going to peel back the onion a little bit and just provide a little more clarity as to kind of the more detailed steps of our rulemaking and primacy. So in late 2024, we conducted numerous stakeholder engagements throughout the state, as well as virtually. Our intent was to obtain feedback from diverse communities across our state as we were drafting our Class 6 regulations. That led us into the fall of 2024, where we actually held our rulemaking sessions. We had roughly 8, pre-rulemaking as well as rulemaking sessions for our Class 6 regulations, and they culminated in December, where the Commission adopted our 1400 series Class 6 rules. Pivoting from that, in early 2025, we started preparing and putting together our primacy application. And then in May, we submitted nearly all components of our application. And off to the right there, you can see that it's composed of 6 kind of primary pieces. The one item that we were still working on and negotiating with EPA was the Memorandum of Agreement. We have finished that and have both Director Murphy as well as Cyrus Western, who's the head of EPA Region 8, signature. So as of October, our primacy application is 100% complete and in the hands of EPA. And we've been focused on it, but where we're really ramping up our efforts is focused on program development, making sure that our forms, guidance documents, database development, as well as staff is prepared and ready to receive primacy. And the go-forward process is really in the hands of EPA. They have a Federal Register notice and public comment process that is going to kick off at the beginning of 2026 and go for several months. And we are expecting a primacy decision somewhere around April or May of next year. Just a recap high level for folks who are here as well as online that are listening. The Class 6 rules, the foundation is really comprised of the EPA regulations. And the way I like to describe them to people is the EPA regulations are very robust from the surface downhole, but from our stakeholder engagement and communicating with folks, really felt that there were pieces that were missing, and that was a little more regulations around the siting, as well as community engagement and kind of cumulative impacts of these projects. And so there's several, siting considerations that are part of our regulations, such as, Class 6 well must be at least 2,000 feet from a residential building unit, high occupancy building unit, a school facility, child care center, or a commercial building unit. There's other siting regulations that could require applicants to hold a community meeting, both before an application is submitted as well as during the application review process. And then another key factor is that we have enabled local governments who have siting regulations to have kind of co-siting authority. And so essentially applicants will need to get a double yes, double thumbs up from both us and the local governments on where the project is sited. And then, as I mentioned, the cumulative impacts rules, which were put into place over the last year, will also be applicable to Class 6 activities. And so we really are pleased with where we landed up and feel that the combination of the EPA regulations as well as our surface siting and community engagement really is a model for other states to utilize that take in a lot of stakeholder input and feedback. As part of our program development, we've been outlining and developing our process and what that looks like, both for internal understanding for all of our teams that are going to be involved, as well as for the public that we can post on our website, as well as hold in stakeholder sessions so that individuals and groups know the timeline of projects. And essentially, we've divided it currently into 4 swim lanes. The very top swim lane is the Class 6 development plan kind of permitting process from pre-application all the way then to the right with that diamond where a Class 6 development application is approved. The second swim lane is then once that application is approved, the applicant has authorization to construct their well to Class 6 standards, but they do not have authority to start injection operations yet. There are further testing that needs to be done in the subsurface, such as gathering specific fluids from the sequestration reservoir, as well as obtaining core from that same reservoir, as well as the intended seal for the system. And then once all of the testing has been done and we have determined that the operation is good to proceed, that will culminate in an authorization to inject, which transitions to kind of the third swim lane there, which is the longest duration of the project. That is the actual injection operations. And they can obviously exist for as long as that planned activity uh, is outlined for. It could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or more. And then the final swim lane at the bottom culminates in the post-injection site care and site closure process. And I wanted to highlight that the bottom right-hand kind of box that I outlined in red is really the remit of the board. When the site is deemed closed and it transfers to the state, the board is responsible for the management of that site in perpetuity. So, and then finally, I know Quinn showed this earlier and it had all the different carbon management projects throughout the state. I just wanted to zoom in specifically on the two permits that are currently at EPA. We'll start with the first one up top. It's the de novo sequestration permit on the eastern plains of Colorado. We believe that the proposed sources are those three ethanol plants that I listed, although I will say that that is just our understanding and should not be taken as fact, just trying to provide a little bit of clarity as to the sources as well as where we think the Class 6 wells are going to be. And again, these are going to be the first projects that this board is considering. The next one is the carbon storage solutions in between Denver and Fort Collins. That is a co-sited location. It's on site of the Front Range ethanol plant. That will more than likely be issued an EPA permit sometime in 2026, probably early in 2026. And so that is on pace for being the first kind of Class 6 well in the state, as well as being the first Class 6 well that we assume regulatory authority over, assuming we get primacy. And so just providing a little bit of color as to the projects that the board will be faced with and kind of see what's coming down the pike. We have heard of other activities that folks are considering in the state, but it's too premature to kind of show where those are and what's being considered at this time. And so that's just a brief kind of overview of our primacy and program development. And now we're going to hop into the meat of the presentation and a lot of great work that Bridget Hunley has been doing to put together kind of our recommendation. So, Bridget.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Bridget Hundley. I'm the geothermal and CCS specialist at ECMC. This paper is the culmination of research over the last few months. It greatly benefited from research by my colleagues Kat Campbell and Mike Rigby, as well as feedback from many within ECMC, Colorado Energy Office, DNR, Ben Boudreau at the AG office, the governor's office, and colleagues in other states. The purpose of this paper was to provide research as to what the appropriate stewardship fee level should be in order to fund long-term stewardship. Long-term stewardship is defined as the monitoring and integrity maintenance of geologic storage facilities after site closure, along with any necessary actions to protect public health and the environment. This is a figure from EPA showing the entire life cycle of a Class 6 project. Mark just got into this, so I won't spend too much time on it, but the operator goes through rigorous pre-permitting, pre-construction, and pre-operation activities before they can begin to inject. They inject for a number of years. When they stop injecting, that triggers the post-injection site care phase. It's during this time that the operator must monitor the plume, plug wells, and demonstrate that there's no endangerment to USDWs. Site closure is approved by ECMC once we have primacy, only once the CO2 plume has stabilized and all requirements are satisfactorily met. It's at that point that long-term stewardship responsibilities can be transferred, as well as facility ownership and title to the injected CO2, and that triggers the fund usage. So there are a number of benefits both to operators and the citizens of Colorado to the state taking on these long-term stewardship responsibilities. HB 251165 established the enterprise to handle long-term stewardship. When we talk about risks, the main risk is that CO2 will migrate from the injection zone and endanger potential future sources of drinking water. Risk is the highest during injection. It gradually climbs as injection volumes increase. Once injection stops, there are a number of mechanisms that allow the CO2 to stabilize. Risk decreases over time. And at the point of site closure, we expect the risk to be much lower than it was during the operation and post-injection site care phases. We expect monitoring costs to be the majority of spending from the fund. The main goal of monitoring during long-term stewardship is to verify that the CO2 is where it was modeled to be and that it is not migrating in a way that would endanger sources of drinking water. So this figure that I have here is from the Sleipner project in Norway. It is one of the longest industrial scale CCS injection projects in the world. It's been injecting since, I believe, 1996. What's shown here is 4D seismic. 4D seismic is a very effective strategy in some geologic settings to monitor the extent of CO2. It is, however, very expensive. And so there are a number of well-respected institutions here in the US, including the EERC out of the University of North Dakota, that are evaluating more cost-effective long-term stewardship strategies that can answer the question of where is the CO2 and is it migrating for a much lower cost than what 4D seismic can currently provide. Those options are, as I mentioned, under research, and we expect them to be commercialized at the point that the state would be taking on these facilities, since it is still decades away. The enterprise is overseen by a board of 5 volunteer members. Those members are the chair of the ECMC Professional Commission, the director of ECMC, an individual with experience in geologic storage, an individual with formal training or experience in environmental protection or public health, and an individual with formal training or experience in wellbore monitoring or other relevant technical fields. The board members were appointed by the governor in August, and they are here with us today on the call. They have a number of responsibilities and accompanying powers to enable them. First and foremost, their main responsibility is to set the stewardship fee. It should be reasonably related to the cost of long-term stewardship services. They may also reevaluate the fee as often as they deem necessary, but they must balance the operator's critical need for price predictability. And finally, there is a requirement to adhere to a fiscal cap. This is not expected to be an issue given the size and quantity of projects in the state, but nonetheless, it is a Tabor requirement. And that fiscal cap is $100 million in the first 5 years. The powers of the board, they are allowed to acquire, hold title to, and dispose of real personal property. They may engage, hire, or contract with technical consultants to support long-term stewardship responsibilities. They may seek and accept gifts, grants, and donations subject to limits. They may impose an orphan facility fee. I should note that the existing financial rules are designed to ensure that facilities are not orphaned in the first place. But in the event that they are, the board is authorized to impose this additional fee on operators specifically to cover the expected costs of addressing any orphaned facilities. And finally, they may implement the rules and undertake new rulemakings if necessary in order to administer the enterprise. The cash fund is the vehicle that will pay for the state's long-term stewardship responsibilities. It is financed primarily by the annual per ton stewardship fee. Other sources of funding include appropriations from the General Assembly and gifts, grants, and donations from public or private sources. The fund is invested by the state treasurer's office. Interest earnings are distributed back to the fund on a monthly basis. So starting with what can the fund be used for? Primarily, it can be used for long-term stewardship activities. As I mentioned, we expect this to primarily be monitoring, but it can also be used for any other long-term stewardship related activities that the board deems necessary. It can be used for orphan facilities. However, as I mentioned, it's recommended to create that separate orphan fee if orphan facilities become an issue in the state. I'm not on the right slide here. There we go. It can also be used for operating expenses. A good example here is employment of technical experts to provide specialized assistance, advice, and services in connection to long-term stewardship responsibilities. When we look at what the fund cannot be used for, it cannot be used for administrative costs. So it's not supposed to be used to fund the Class 6 permitting program. In fact, it can't even be touched until the point of site closure. It cannot be used to cover any financial assurance obligations that all operators must hold up until the point of site closure. And it is not intended to pay salaries or service compensation to the enterprise board members outside of standard per diem. In summary, the legislative intent is that this fund is reserved strictly for long-term stewardship activities. Moving into the research portion of this paper, research involved both a literature review and a review of stewardship fees in other states. Starting with the literature review, we recognize that there's uncertainty regarding the probability of leakage events over the long timeframes of geologic storage projects. Monte Carlo analysis has numerous applications, but we can use it here for estimating long-term leakage probability and associated costs. Monte Carlo analysis is especially useful to identify which inputs have the greatest impact on outcome. And the outcomes of these analyses can serve as useful references for the board as it evaluates the appropriate level of stewardship fees, but these are imperfect, and I will get into why. Starting with the ADM Illinois project, this was a study to evaluate the appropriate level of financial assurance for this project. It identified 13 risks over a 25-year time frame. That time frame was split into 15 years of operational phase, so injection, and 10 years of post-injection site care. And it used detailed geologic and hydrologic data to estimate the probability of occurrence and the cost of remediation. The expected risk-weighted value for those two phases combined was $5.5 million or 14 cents per ton. Now, I mentioned these both are imperfect comparisons. This one is an imperfect comparison for two reasons. It includes the operational and post-injection site care phases. The risk during those two phases is expected to be higher than it would be during long-term stewardship. So that's one reason. The second reason is that pipeline events were 44% of the risk-weighted costs. Pipelines would be decommissioned at the point of site closure. So there may be justification to set the stewardship fee below this project's probability-weighted annual cost in this example. Moving into the FutureGen Texas project, this was a study that looked at the FutureGen site in Jewett, Texas. The model considered a 100-year time frame that included 50 years of injection operations and 50 years of post-injection monitoring. The financial impacts included potential costs for compensation, remediation, and an atmospheric release that would require the purchase of carbon offset credits. I will note here that it will be up to the board members to determine if carbon offset credits are the most prudent use of funds. However, that is what this study looked at, so keep that in mind. Results estimated the most likely, so the 50th percentile damages at 15 cents per ton, and the upper end damages at 34 cents per ton. There were potential releases at legacy well locations with probabilities that were responsible for over 95% of the model total damages. This may not be the situation at every future site, as the density of legacy wellbores and the quality of past and current remediation jobs of those legacy wellbores will vary. ECMC rules require adequate remediation of legacy wellbores, and that could lessen this probability. So again, both of these studies were modeled for the injection and post-injection site care phases. There's not one that exists for long-term stewardship that we could find. So it is imperfect, but it can serve as a good reference point as the board tries to think about what risks might look like. We also looked at stewardship fee in primacy states. We evaluated the 3 states who have had primacy for the longest. No state or project has reached the point of long-term stewardship, so it is all a best estimate at this point. North Dakota charges 7 cents per ton for its carbon dioxide storage facility trust fund. This is for CO2 that is produced within North Dakota and then injected also in North Dakota. It charges a higher stewardship fee for CO2 that is produced out of state. And I shouldn't say a higher fee. It is subject to a hearing where they may determine a higher fee for CO2 that is produced from out of state. Wyoming is the most similar to Colorado in how it's set up. It charges 7 cents per ton for its special revenue account. Louisiana is the most dissimilar from Colorado. It has a variable fee that is tied to an equation. It's capped at 5 million per facility or 10 million per operator. But these funds are commingled with long-term stewardship and other expenses. And critically, it is not just the stewardship fee that funds this, it is also permitting fees and area review filing fees and all the other fees that they employ in Louisiana. So my colleagues Kat and Mike took a detailed look at all other states who have some sort of long-term stewardship fund set up. The fees range from 2.5 cents in Texas to 64 cents in Illinois, but most are in the 7 to 13 cents per ton range. Other fee considerations, starting with Tabor. Tabor is Colorado's taxpayers' Bill of Rights. In order to ensure that the fee continues to be exempt from Tabor limits, the board should ensure that the fee is reasonably related to the cost of long-term stewardship services. For fee reevaluation, the board may adjust as frequently as they deem necessary, but they must keep operators' need for price predictability in mind. We do expect investment returns to offset standard inflationary impacts. But if inflation is outpacing these investment returns, the board can manually adjust the fee based on that. It is not recommended to add an automatic inflation factor like Alaska does because we do not have specific statutory language that will allow for that. Other limiting factors is that Colorado's fee structure is prescribed in statute as a fee per ton. Colorado's financial exposure is protected by governmental immunity. At the point of site closure, operators are released from regulatory liability, but we do have the option to reimpose regulatory liability on the operator in certain cases. And finally, ECMC has rigorous rules to ensure proper siting and continued monitoring throughout the life of the project. And this helps to ensure that at the point of site closure, there is very low risk that the CO2 will migrate from the injection zone. So our recommendation is to set the fee in a range of 8 to 12 cents per ton of injected CO2. This range is expected to balance expected long-term stewardship costs with fund self-sufficiency. There are 2 projects in Colorado in the application phase with EPA currently. Those projects have lower injection volumes than other projects nationwide, but they will incur similar base costs for long-term stewardship, specifically for monitoring. And so to account for that lower revenue of stewardship fees that comes from the lower volume projects, we've increased it slightly compared to other states. We also feel that this range aligns with risk-weighted probability models. Other recommendations for the orphan facility fee, the board does have the power to impose it, but our recommendation is to not impose one at this time because statutory criteria for imposing the fee has not been met. This flexibility can be reserved for the future if it's needed. And for fee reevaluation cadence, we recommend initially reevaluating the fee 3 years after it's set, followed by a second reevaluation after either 3 or 5 years based on the board's preference. And after that, implement a consistent 5-year cadence. We feel this balances the enterprise's needs for long-term financial security against the operator's need for price predictability. Thank you for your time today. We welcome any questions and discussions.
Thank you very much. A ton of good information. Want to really thank the members of our team for rolling up their sleeves and putting together a lot of good information for consideration by the board. As just a point, it's a little weighty decision for board members dealing that we're making decisions that could be in effect for a long period of time. The 10 to 50 year period of carbon sequestration for example. I do appreciate the fact that we can revisit decisions as they're made. And appreciate all the looks into other folks that are doing this, other states, but would also note that kind of this whole thing is in its infancy all the way around, which makes this daunting. And so I just want to thank everybody for the presentation. Those are just some kind of general remarks. Do other board members have remarks or questions? We have the entire panel before us now. Raise your hand if you want to say anything. Oh, Commissioner or Board Member Randall. Sorry, I'm used to working with commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to thank you, Bridget, for the presentation and for the work on the white paper of you and your team. I have a question. I was interested in your description of the Monte Carlo analysis and your look at the ADM Illinois project and the Future Gen Texas project. In particular, sort of, you mentioned that oil and gas legacy wellbores are a source of risk. And so I guess I'm pretty familiar with the commission's work to address orphan wells and closure requirements and protection of drinking water sources or other underground sources of water. I guess I just wondered if it's premature or if you've been looking at the status of wells in the vicinity of the two projects that are likely to come forward, the de novo sequestration project in particular, just because of the part of the state that it's in. It is my sense that there's a fair bit of legacy oil and gas activity out there. And candidly, I just don't know the status of a lot of that activity. And so I wondered if that's something you all are looking at or if that's premature.
Thanks for your question. I have not personally looked at it. Do other panelists have a better understanding of what the legacy wellbore situation looks like?
I'm happy to take that one. So all the Class 6 regulations require an extensive look at every project, wellbore by wellbore, remediating all legacy wellbores up to standards to ensure that CO2 that those will not be a leakage pathway. That said, there are not many legacy wellbores in the vicinity of that de novo project. The ones that are in the vicinity of the other project stop short of the storage reservoir and are shallower than the target storage reservoir. But I can just reiterate that every Class 6 project near legacy wellbores will need to thoroughly evaluate every single wellbore and prove their integrity before they can even get their permit to inject.
Board Member Murphy, I see you have your hand raised. I don't know if that was pre-question or post-question or relevant here.
It was pre-question, so if there are follow-ups, I'm happy to wait. Or additional questions on that topic. I see Bob saying no, or sorry, Board Member Randall saying no. I had a couple of questions, one around, kind of digging into the fee recommendations from the white paper, and then one focusing more on timing. And so I think I'll start with the fee questions and then see if there are other questions related to that from the other board members, and then jump into kind of timing and cadence, recognizing that this is an initial meeting and, looking at it through the lens of how do we administer this board successfully kind of over the course of time. So on thing one, as I've reviewed materials in preparation for this hearing and based on the work that I have done, helping to move the state forward along with this team of staff members on the carbon sequestration front, I noticed that the Jewett study included in its fee numbers, which were higher than what staff is recommending in the white paper, consideration of purchasing credits should there be a release. And I guess I have a very compound question that I'm going to just kind of walk through. But functionally, I haven't seen much guidance for our board to be in the business of purchasing credits should there be a release to mitigate the climate impacts. I think that the focus of our board in the long-term stewardship space is more focused on protecting surface owners, drinking water supplies from the impact of CO2 moving outside of where it was intended to be, right outside of the pore space or the area of review. And so as I'm looking at the different fee structures, including a consideration of costs for purchasing carbon credits seems bigger than what we're focused on doing. And what I'm trying to do is kind of narrow down how we get to an actual fee. And so I'm sorry for that really long-winded, fairly leading, fairly deliberative type question, but Ms. Hunley, I'd really appreciate your thoughts and anybody else on the team about that thought, and I welcome pushback as well.
Thank you. You are right that Jewett study includes the purchase of carbon offset credits. We have not seen language from other states regarding whether or not that would be a prudent use of their funds. It would be up to the board to determine whether or not it would be a prudent use of our funds, but it does not appear to me that it would align with the board's responsibilities and protecting public health, safety, welfare, and the environment. Do others have other thoughts on this?
I'll jump in here. To some extent, some of that would be established through the IRS and 45Q procedures, as well as, to the extent that these Class 6 well rules were used to address people's GEM obligations. I think it would be addressed through some of kind of the obligation and compliance and crediting systems as opposed to the regulatory structure from this board. And to double click on the point that, yeah, by the time these fees are addressed, kind of a lot of those issues will be kind of over and done.
Thank you, Board Member Ross. Others with thoughts? Other questions for the panel? All right.
Sorry, Chair.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Can we talk a little bit about the timing? And I kind of want to pull out a little bit more on that. I think that kind of a staggered approach to reconsidering fees makes sense, right? Like where we are today, we're going to continue to learn more as projects come online, whether they're in Colorado or outside of it as the research develops. And so I generally want to think about from staff standpoint, Ms. Hunley, Mr. Rigby, Mr. Seeley. On the one hand, I think meeting more frequently, like annually, will help keep the board kind of coalesced and aligned and understanding where things going, even if we're not setting or reevaluating the fees every year. And so I guess, do you think that there's utility in coming together and continuing to monitor Colorado's progress and other projects? Do you think that we should be on that kind of longer term cadence? I'd just like your thoughts on what that looks like so that we can, deliberate as a board and plan accordingly.
I'll hop in. Thanks, Director Murphy. I think that is, in my opinion, would be a prudent approach. While maybe annually you're not going through the effort of thoroughly reevaluating fees, but annually you're keeping up on what's going on across the nation and keeping everybody kind of involved and cued in on all the considerations that are emerging nationwide and worldwide. So I would simply say I agree.
And I second what Mike said as well. I think with the industry just beginning, it would be helpful to stay in touch and engaged with the latest developments and let that influence and drive current and kind of future decisions.
Thank you both. Chair, I think that's actually the end of my questions.
No, I think that's a good one. And I guess one thing that I would suggest to our staff that's with us is, you guys are going to be closer to the ground on developments in this arena than this board is. Reconvene us as you feel necessary. Like, feel free to bring us back to the table so that you can keep us abreast of what is happening, how things are going. Uh, you know, the board as a board is excited to work together, but individually we all have day jobs. So definitely feel free to bring us back together as is necessary so that we can make sure that we're all working together to establish success for the state of Colorado. Okay, I'm seeing nodding of the heads up and down, so I think everybody's in agreement with that. Let's bring in AAG Boudreau. Do you want to provide us with final thoughts, perspective, next steps, etc.?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Seeing as how the board seems to be moving towards wrapping it up today, I have a few recommendations for motions that the board might consider. The first is whether to make a motion to post the stewardship fee white paper to the Enterprise Board's webpage. It's my understanding this is a paper put together by staff with information for the board to consider on setting the fee. And for the purposes of good government and transparency, it might be prudent to make that white paper available to the general public so they might review it and be able to intelligently comment on it before the board's next meeting. I'd also recommend consideration of a motion for the board to direct ECMC staff to establish and publish a process and deadline for members of the public to submit written public comments regarding the stewardship fee ahead of the board's next meeting. I believe the board's next meeting is scheduled for January 27th, and that may be the time when the board starts to consider, the amount for setting the fee. Again, for the purpose of transparency and good government, allowing the general public to submit written comments for the board to consider so that there are more perspectives than just staff's would probably be prudent in my view. And then my final recommendation would be a motion to adjourn this meeting and reconvene on January 27th, 2025 at 9 a.m. to consider the public comments should the board decide to allow written public comments, to consider the public comments, deliberate on the stewardship fee amount, and if the board has sufficient information to do so, to set the stewardship fee amount. So those are the three motions I would recommend the board consider. Obviously, it's entirely within your purview to consider whatever motions you like.
Thank you very much. Let's take them up one at a time. Thoughts about posting the white paper? I think it's a good idea. Anybody else?
I agree, Mr. Chair. I think just in the interest of transparency and in the interest of soliciting feedback from interested members of the public and the regulated industry, I think it'd be helpful.
You want to make a motion, Mr. Board Member Randall?
I will move that we post the stewardship fee white paper to the ECMC's webpage dedicated for this board.
Very good. Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have discussion on said motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries. What about the ideas from AAG Boudreau about directing staff to set up a process to obtain public comment on the work that we are going to contemplate in the future? Thoughts? See some thumbs up. Does anybody want to make a motion? You could just say so moved, I think.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying all aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Good initial board meeting. Look forward to working with this group over the next 50 years or so. No, in all candor, really want to thank our staff for the tremendous amount of work that has made us look like we know what we're doing, which is fantastic. I would move to adjourn until January 27th, 2026 at 9 a.m., at which time we may take up the idea of fees. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. See everybody next year.
Thank you.
Happy
See you guys.
holidays.
Yeah.
Thank you all.